Hi, I've left the workshop today to tell you some of the tips and tricks about sawing. I've covered a lot of the main points in the previous videos to do with stance, grip on the saw, etc. But it does definitely worth repeating some of the minor points which go towards making more accurate or speedier cuts. So, in no particular order, let's start with supporting the waste as you cut it off. If you don't support it quite lightly before you finish cutting, it's going to break away and tear splinters out of your workpiece. So always support the waste. For saws that have little set, so dovetail saws, tenon saws, etc., they can jam very easily in a cut, and it's worth just putting a little bit of paste wax, a bit of candle wax, etc., just above the tooth line. That'll ease the cut. For greatest accuracy, use knife lines to mark your cut, and then create a knife wall by paring away with the chisel into the waste up to the knife line. Pick the right profile teeth. There are teeth with profiles specifically for ripping and for cross-cutting. Picking the right one will help both with speed and also the quality of the cut. If your saw has a rising pitch, so that is some of the teeth are spaced closer together than ones at the other end, use the teeth that are closely spaced together when you start your cut. And once you've started, you can use the teeth that are more widely spaced apart to progress the cut that much faster. Don't hold on to your saw handle as if someone's trying to steal it from you. You only need a very light touch. The more you grip it, the more likelihood is that you're going to influence the way it cuts rather than it following the line. If you're having difficulty giving it a light touch, then as soon as you've started your cut, try pinching your thumb and little finger together, and that just relaxes the muscles that would normally influence the saw too much. If you want to increase the speed at which you're cutting, then increase your stroke rate. Don't put extra pressure onto the saw. That's especially true for Japanese saws. For Western saws, you can apply a little bit more thrust. Consider how many teeth you have engaged in the cut. Too few and the saw's going to bounce over the cut. Too many and the gullets will clog up with sawdust and slow down your sawing. Optimally, you should have somewhere between 3 and 12 teeth in a cut, and many occasions that's not going to be possible. Often where your material is too thick and you can have more teeth engaged. By angling the saw, you can approach the cut from a few different angles and reduce the number of teeth engaged, and that should help with the speed of cut. To help prevent your saw drifting, provide an entry kerf for it. You might want to use a kerfing plane or just do it with a normal saw. Just cutting to a little depth where the saw is going to be entering during the cut can make it a lot easier for the saw to enter on the correct line. To test the set of your saw to make sure it's even on both sides, saw a few lines trying to go plumb but without any marking out, then have a look at them. If they all veer off in the same direction, then the direction they're veering off into is the side of the saw on which it has too much set. If some veer one way, some veer the other way, then that's going to be down to your sawing, so maybe your stance or the way you're gripping the saw. So consider that. If all the cuts are nice and plumb, then you know pretty much that the set is equal on both sides of the saw plate. When you're marking out for the cut, mark all the cut lines, and when you're sawing, make sure you can see at least 2 of them as you progress the cut. A nice shiny saw plate doesn't just look good, it can be very useful. You can use the reflection of the work to help guide the angle at which you're cutting. For straight plumb cuts, the reflection of the workpiece should follow in a straight line from the actual workpiece itself. If you're trying to cut a 45, then you'll find that the reflection should be at 90 degrees to the workpiece. And you'll find your eye and your brain is quite good at determining what's straight and what's at 90 degrees. So that can really help the accuracy. Try and pick the right saw for the job. If you're trying to cut straight lines, then you'll want a blade which has quite a bit of width to it. That width in the kerf keeps things nice and straight. So you'll be using perhaps a hand saw, panel saw, or one of the backed saws. If you want to cut curves, then the width of the saw plate wants to be quite narrow. So we're thinking of things like the keyhole saw, compass saw, and the good old table saw. For really tight radiuses, you'll want to move on to something like a coping saw or maybe a fret saw. Also consider the number of teeth per inch. The more teeth per inch, then the slower the cut's going to be, but the finer the finish should be. Whereas to progress work nice and fast, go for a coarser, less teeth per inch saw. Now I'm sure there are plenty more tips out there, and if you've got any yourself, please leave them in the comments. Now let's have a little look at work holding. Now there are many different ways to hold your workpiece. Let's just go through as many as I can think of right now. And again, if you've got any yourself, any suggestions, please leave them in the comments. So first of all, at the workbench, you can hold it in a bench vise, either the face vise or the tail vise. You can hold it between dogs. You could clamp it to the workbench, either on top or to the face of the workbench. Hold fast can be very useful at the bench. They're quickly applied and quickly removed, and if they've got a long arm on them, you can get to a lot of different places to hold your work away from where you're sawing. One of the most useful devices is the bench hook, which is great for holding work for cross-cutting. And if you've got long pieces, make yourself a couple of bench hooks so you can support the long end. A lot of people like to use saw horses. I'm not a big fan of them, but they do come into their own when you have large sheet goods to deal with. Some of the various ways of using them can be either singly if you're cross-cutting, shortish lengths, in a pair if you're cross-cutting longer lengths. If you're ripping a long piece, then in a pair you can rip in front of the one horse, then as you've ripped far enough to be able to move the whole cut back behind the first horse, continue sawing towards the end, and then eventually move the work back over the rear saw horse and finish the cut. If you're cutting something thin or a large piece of man-made board, then you might like to put a couple of planks on your saw horses either side of where the cut's going to be and saw between them. A dedicated sawing bench is really good, and you can clamp work to it using ordinary clamps, using dogs if you've got dog holes in it, or hold fast. Because the saw bench is reasonably low, it should be nice and comfortable to kneel on the work and maybe use your other leg to support it from moving backwards and rotating on the top of the bench. There are many different ways you can find to use it as well. You might even end up standing on it, or standing it on top of your normal workbench and working up at a higher height. And maybe consider adding some flip stops to your workbench, sawyer's bench, or maybe your planing bench. Slightly allied to work holding is holding the kerf apart, and it's always good to have a wedge. If your kerf starts to close up on a rip cut, you can just tap a wedge in at the beginning of the cut just to open it up so your saw isn't jammed. Well, I hope you found that useful. I'd like to thank Matthew at this point, who jogged my memory on a few points and also gave me a couple of tips which I hadn't heard of before, which make a lot of sense. So thanks, Matthew. And if you've got any good tips, please leave them in the comments or email me. Thanks very much. See you next time. Please take a moment to like, comment and subscribe, and follow me on social media for extra photos and videos from the workshop. Cheerio!